Number 9. Black Sea Shipwreck. While exploring the waters off the coast of Bulgaria in 2018, scientists from the Black Sea Maritime Archaeology Project, or MAP, spotted a shockingly intact shipwreck. By then, the team had already seen at least 60 other sunken vessels, but this one stood out among the others because of how incredibly well preserved it was. It sits over a mile below the surface in what's known as the anoxic layer of the sea, where there is less oxygen in the water. Physical and chemical decay happen much more slowly at extreme depths, which is why the ship is in such great condition despite being an estimated 2,400 years old. It's not the most ancient submerged vessel in the region, but it's the only known ship of its age that contains a preserved mast, rowing benches, and other features that are not normally seen in wrecks from that time period. The ancient boat resembles the vessel seen in Greek artwork, offering a hint about its possible origins. A portion of the wreck was raised and radiocarbon dated to the 5th century BC, when Greek city-states and Mediterranean colonies frequently traded along the Black Sea coast. While little is known about the ship itself, its pristine state is giving experts an unprecedented glimpse back in time. Number 8. Ancient Hunting Bow. In 2022, National Park Service employees discovered a centuries-old hunting bow lying in 2 feet of water in Alaska's Lake Clark National Park and Reserve. Radiocarbon dating revealed that the bow is around 460 years old and that it was made sometime between 1506 and 1660. But where the bow comes from is an even bigger question than its age. It was found in south-central Alaska, on lands where the ancestors of the indigenous Dena'ina people once lived. Yet the bow may not be of Dena'ina regions. Researchers consulted with local elders and compared it with similar objects found around the same time, and the bow appears to have more in common with artifacts that were crafted by the Yupik and Alutiiq cultures. The Dena'ina interacted with other indigenous groups in the region, including the Yupik, which could explain how the bow ended up on Dena'ina ancestral lands. At the last update, experts were still working to determine where the bow came from. They sought the help of wood identification expert Dr. Priscilla Morris, who believes that the bow is made from spruce. To know for sure, she'd have to examine a cut fragment of the artifact under a microscope, but the NPS wants to keep it intact because it's a rare discovery for the region, so the team may have to rely on less invasive clues to get to the bottom of the mystery. Number 7. The Guerrero. The Spanish slave ship Guerrero was a former privateer vessel originally called the James Monroe that served during the War of 1812. But its history is largely shrouded in mystery. During the 1820s, the slave trade was illegal in Cuba, which is where the Guerrero primarily did business. To evade authorities, most ships that transported slaves to the island were eventually destroyed or renamed between runs. As a result, most have been lost to history. The Guerrero was heavily armed. At 110 feet long and 14 12-pounder guns and a crew of 90 men, the ship was most likely not only involved in the slave trade, but also most likely a pirate ship. While sailing from Africa to Havana in December of 1827, with 561 African captives aboard, the Guerrero caught the attention of the British anti-slavery patrol ship HMS Nimble in the Florida Straits. The Nimble fired a few warning shots, signaling that its crew planned to inspect the Guerrero, but the Guerrero's captain hightailed it, sparking a 5-hour chase that ended with both ships crashing on a reef off Key Largo. The collision tore into the slave ship's hull and toppled its masts. As the Guerrero sank, 41 of the African captives it was carrying drowned. 20 of the crewmen and 142 of the captives were rescued by a fishing boat called the Florida, which the crew proceeded to hijack and sail to Cuba. Several crewmen also hijacked a schooner called the Thorn after being rescued and sailed it to Cuba with 246 captive Africans on board. The captives who ended up in Cuba were sold into slavery, while most of the remaining captives were returned to Africa. The Diving with a Purpose underwater archaeology program, which focuses on recovering shipwrecks with a focus on African diaspora, teamed up with the National Park Service and the National Association of Black Scuba Divers to participate in the search for the Guerrero. They located the wreck during their dives between 2010 and 2012. and have recovered early 19th century cologne bottles, bone china, lead shot, earthenware, metal rigging, copper fasteners, and wooden plank fragments. Number 6. The Port of Amathus. Built during the 3rd or 4th century BC, the port of Amathus was an artificial harbor located near the modern-day city of Limassol in southern Cyprus. According to experts, it was an impressive but short-lived project of the Hellenistic period, which may have never been completed. The site consists of 3 piers made from large carved rectangular stones, which were built to protect ships from strong winds. Today it sits 13 feet underwater and extends 328 feet from the shore. Sadly, it looks as though the ancient harbor was never actually used. By the 6th century AD, all of the city's residents had fled Amathus. Archaeologists think the exodus may have been triggered by Arab raids, but they admittedly aren't sure. Experts first investigated the site during the 1980s. In 2005, an artificial reef was established among the ruins, and it has greatly damaged the structures. Officials want to turn the site into an underwater park, and it's fueling tensions among environmentalists who are concerned about the proposed removal of a protected marine plant called Neptune grass and those who want to see the harbor preserved. Authorities have made it clear that they're pushing forward with the plans. They promised the public that they will protect both the Neptune grass, which is vital to aquatic ecosystems in the Mediterranean, and the submerged ruins. Number 5. Exploded warship. Sitting at a depth of 361 feet in the Aegean Sea, an old ship bears evidence that it was blown up before it sank to its watery grave. The 130-foot-long vessel's bow is missing, and the stern has collapsed. Shredded metal sheets were ejected from the sides of the ship, and the sea floor is scattered with debris as far as 100 feet away from the main wreck. The ship was discovered by divers in 2022 near the Greek island of Kithnos, where it came to rest pointing in a northerly direction. Its unique construction of closely spaced frame lines, no holes, and a low profile of just 10 feet in height bears elements of what expedition leader Kostas Thokratidis described as a very old ship, possibly a warship. The team that discovered the vessel declined to speculate on its age or who it belonged to. Aside from very clear evidence that it was destroyed in a very strong explosion, its origins and story are a complete mystery. Dr. Roditis and his team hope to identify the ship through further research. Number 4. Mystery plane debris. While sailing off the St. Augustine, Florida coast in 2012 with plans to take photos of reefs for an interactive map he was creating, 31-year-old Joel Kistel's depth finder detected an object 80 feet below the surface. He dove to the site and observed metal parts and debris that he initially thought had perhaps fallen off a barge. They were actually plane parts, including 2 engines, an engine block, and a broken propeller. The wreckage may belong to an aircraft that disappeared 16 years earlier in 1996. 58-year-old Stuart Dunbar was flying his small plane alone from Georgia to his home in South Carolina when he put out a concerning distress call saying that he was dizzy and having vision problems. He vanished along with the aircraft, leaving his family without answers. Dunbar's daughter, Penny Malfris, told CNN that she believes her father steered the plane away from land to avoid hurting anyone when he realized he was having an emergency. When some local fishermen heard about the discovery, they took Kistel to another site 4 miles away where he found another aircraft. He broke off a piece of debris only to later notice that it had "Property of the US" written on it, indicating that it was a military aircraft. It also contained numbers that helped Kistel's family identify the plane as an A-7, last flown by a pilot named Robert Basal. As it turned out, Basal was still alive. He was 24 years old when he became disoriented and hit the fuselage of his commander's plane during a training flight in the 1970s. Basal told StAugustine.com that the plane lost power and flew out of control. He ejected and was rescued from the water, but said he wasn't exactly proud of the mishap and didn't talk about it much. In fact, he never told a lot of people about the accident, period. After Kistel rediscovered the aircraft, Basal decided to finally face the part of his past that he had tried so long to forget about. He visited the wreck site, and it seemed to help him finally come to terms with what happened. Number 3. The Churchill. In 2005, researchers discovered a 19th century wooden ship at French Frigate Shoals in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. 2 years later, in 2007, a team of scientists from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration visited the wreck in hopes of identifying it. Based on the ship's features, they concluded that it was most likely the Churchill, a four-masted schooner that ran aground on a reef in 1917 while sailing from Tonga to Seattle. The wreck's size and dimensions were also consistent with the 178-foot-long ship. Built in North Bend, Oregon in 1900, the 1,600-ton Churchill's design was typical of the large wooden schooners that dominated American shipping in the Pacific between the Civil War and World War I. When it ran aground, it was carrying a cargo of copra, or dried coconut meat. Luckily, all 12 crew members were rescued by a nearby fishing boat. They accused the captain, Charles Granzo, of deliberately destroying the ship, and he was charged with espionage. The disgruntled sailors claimed that Granzo wanted to remain aboard the Churchill even after it was apparent that they would only survive if they got into lifeboats. It's unclear what became of the matter. After exploring the wreck, NOAA marine archaeologists admitted that they can't say with certainty that it is the Churchill, but all signs point towards it. Number 2. Ancient offerings. Located along the modern-day border between Bolivia and Peru, Lake Titicaca was one of the ancient Incas' most sacred sites. The once powerful civilization considered the lake to be their place of origin, and its significance increased dramatically during the 16th and 17th centuries. Many artifacts have been found at the site that speak to its importance. During an underwater survey a few years ago, archaeologists discovered a small box. Measuring just 14 by 10 and 6.5 inches, the container is made from a locally sourced volcanic stone called andesite. The artifact was retrieved from 18 feet below the water surface, where it had sat undisturbed for more than 5 centuries. It contained a llama figurine made from a rare and valuable coral shell, as well as a small rolled sheet of gold. Researchers believe that the items were immersed into the lake as part of a ritualistic offering to the Inca gods. The box is just one of numerous discoveries at Lake Titicaca that were likely deposited as part of a spiritual ceremony. Over 24 stone boxes have been recovered from another part of the lake, while the contents of only 4 were found intact. They contained offerings including figurines of male and female humans, as well as llamas made from precious metals and other valuable materials. Christopher Dallaire, who co-authored a study of the artifacts, told National Geographic that the offerings contained requests of varying amounts and contexts, including political and agricultural pleadings. He also said that the Inca who lived along Lake Titicaca were likely influenced by previous cultures, such as the Tiwanaku, who inhabited the area between 200 BC and 1000 AD. But the exact meanings and the dynamics behind the offerings are admittedly up for debate among experts who are still trying to interpret them. Number 1. The Breadalbane. Captain John Franklin was one of many European explorers who competed to find a polar sea route linking the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, known as the Northwest Passage. In 1845, he set sail on his mission with a 129-member crew and 2 ships, the HMS Erebus and the HMS Terror. 2 months into the voyage, the vessels became icebound in Canada's Victoria Strait. The crews remained on the ships for a year before they left on foot, despite having several years' worth of food on board. Over 100 search missions ensued over the following decade. In 1853, the British Royal Navy sent a Scottish-built merchant bark, the Breadalbane, to the high Arctic to resupply an expedition that was out searching for Franklin and his crew. The 3-masted ship made it all the way to Resolute Bay, roughly 500 miles above the Arctic Circle, without any major problems. Things took a horrifying turn one night when slow-moving ice surrounded the Breadalbane and pierced its starboard bow. The crew gathered as much equipment and belongings as they could carry and rushed off the ship as it became choked by the encroaching ice. It took less than 15 minutes for the vessel to disappear completely beneath the surface. Luckily, all 21 crew members survived and were soon rescued. The Breadalbane wreck was rediscovered in the Barrow Strait in 1980 at a depth of 330 feet. It's famous for being one of the world's northernmost shipwrecks and one of the most intact wooden saltwater wrecks ever found. Thanks to the dark and frigid conditions of the Arctic Sea, the sunken ship has sustained minimal damage over the years and is deteriorating much more slowly than a typical wooden vessel. Several artifacts have been brought to the surface for preservation and display, including the steering wheel. Thanks for watching. Which one of these underwater discoveries was your favorite? Let me know in the comments, and remember to subscribe to more videos like these. See you next time. Bye for now.